Go. So please feel free to unmute and
No.
no.
Oh, that's to my son.
Yes. And Professors Morrison, Sherman, and Goncalves, please tell us what you think, if some of your opinions changed or reinforced from when you were in the seminar, and share any stories you'd like.
Who would like to start?
You go.
I, as I mentioned, I absolutely love seeing this. I mean, it's just a very fresh to see Jay articulating his thoughts on this important issue. I think that we last left in the chat this issue of courage, and perhaps that might be a good place to start. One thing that I will mention is that as a PhD student, and then I remember this issue of courage, at least at MIT, at that time, there was this culture that we had learned and we had seen about for system dynamics that was all about tackling important problems, world problems, urban dynamics, and a number of different things. And we had subsided into a situation of trying to become academics, traditional academics. And in that sense, we had basically focused on problems that were much more incremental and much more limited in scope. And of course, from an academic point of view, that made sense. And, if you're trying to build a career as an assistant professor, associate professor, eventually full, and build connections to other disciplines. And there was, of course, pros and cons about that. So I'll leave it at that, but I really respect Jay's point about courage and tackling important problems.
So this topic actually is quite related to the. It's very interesting that we saw this particular clip where Jay got onto that topic, and Scott clearly asked several questions, and Nelson as well, about sort of why it's not happening. I think it's quite related to the sort of reason that this seminar series took place in the very beginning. So I thought I might share that story. It's probably not well known. It all started actually with a conversation that I was having with Jim Hines, who was on the faculty in the System Dynamics group at MIT at that time, and he convinced me that we were, as doctoral students, so Mila's, Paulo, me, Laura, Christy, Scott, that were the doctoral students in residence at the time. And he said, I think you're the first group of doctoral students that is not really getting firsthand instruction or interaction with Jay. Now, Mila knew him already from her work with the Roadmaps program when she was an undergraduate, but the rest of us had really never had firsthand interactions with Jay on an ongoing basis. And Jim convinced me. He said, you guys are absolutely getting the best technical education in system dynamics that you might, but I'm worried, this is Jim speaking, I'm worried that you're not really getting a good sense of, and the word that he used, I still remember it, a good sense of the ethos of system dynamics. So what I just heard Jay talking about in that video was, in a lot of ways, his articulation of the ethos of system dynamics. Was that there was this sort of mission to be working on important things. Jay didn't really have a whole lot of I'm going to say this the wrong way. He did not have overwhelming respect for the institution of academia. He was much more interested in the practical problems of the real world, and I think that came through in that clip there. So just to take this interesting story a little further to the slightly humorous part of it. So Jim convinced me in that conversation, and then I talked with Mila and Paulo and Laura, the doctoral students to see if we'd be interested in something like this, and they all said sure. So I approached Jay and said, would you be willing to meet with us, on a regular basis every Friday or something like that for a seminar? And he thought about it, and I sort of did some of this by email. And he basically said, yes, and there are 3 conditions. And this is so Jay-like, if you realize that. So the first condition was an obvious thing that almost anybody was said, which was, sure, but the doctoral students have to make the syllabus and come up with the reading list, which parenthetically, by the way, we did. And then he completely changed it anyway. So it wasn't like he wasn't doing that, but he made us do that work as any good professor would. The second condition is a very interesting one. He said, no faculty members will be allowed. And I now understand that the reason he did that was because he did not want to have any manipulation or trying to make points or trying to show face or anything like that. He wanted it to really be him with the doctoral students. And we actually had to get special dispensation from Jay to allow Nelson to participate. Nelson was in his second or third year as maybe fourth year as an assistant professor at the time. And he still looks like a young little boy there. So he was younger than I am, actually. And so we got dispensation for that. And then the third one was the really interesting one, which was, it was his wife's idea. His wife, Susan, said to Jay, if you're going to do this, you should record it. And so Jay said the third condition was that if we do this, we record it. And that's why you guys are all able to see it now. That triggered a whole series of behind the scenes work associated with figuring out how to basically do this. And, this was all recorded in a television basically a television studio in the basement of Building 9 at MIT by some pretty professional television kind of people. Jay didn't want to just have somebody turn on their, well, we didn't have cell phones at the time to do video recording, but there were cell phones, but they weren't recording videos. So there was all this stuff, and Jay is a very detail-oriented person. So there were at least 3 or 4 times when I met with Jay and the television people to talk about how we're going to do it. And Jay was concerned about everything from, what's the color of the background going to be, to what kind of suit should he wear, to should people be wearing makeup or not. And the most interesting thing I still remember is when Jay was interested in how the conversion from digital to analog was going to take place in the recording. And one of the television engineers tried to start explaining something to Jay, not realizing that Jay, was the inventor of random access memory and had this amazing, technical background Jay was pretty much there at the beginning of the analog to digital transition. And so it was just kind of, without laughing out loud, I was laughing inside about this poor guy trying to explain something to Jay, and he was getting grilled on all these technical aspects that literally had nothing to do with the system dynamics seminar, but they were, it was just a path that he was just a pit bull when it came to details like that. So anyway, we were very fortunate to have the opportunity to do this, and I'm so glad that he insisted on the recordings, because now, and I'm really glad that all of you are watching it, because I there's a little hope that this viewing will help to communicate some of that very ethos that was the sort of the intent in the first place. There's a whole lot of good system dynamics content and a lot of good J stories, but there's also this theme that goes through there. So I hope that story raises a little bit of your attention level to the things that in here are about, what the field was about in Jay's mind. So.
Yeah, and just wanted to also add to that, just, and it was definitely discussed even into today's part of the seminar, is that, he was totally fine being controversial. He didn't blink an eye to do it. And he made us think this way, right? But it's actually totally fine, right? Remember, we're students, right? And this is a revolutionary person who was revolutionary in at least 3 fields, right? And it's just amazing. And so it's kind of, we look up to him as a mentor, and just wow, this is what he's saying. And just also he mentioned today is it's totally, many people are actually are not good in being uncomfortable. They don't want to be uncomfortable. And it resonated a little bit different with me now, 20 plus years later, right? Especially when we see the political cycle, the cultural problems that we see currently, right? Many people will know that something is wrong, but they will not do anything. Right, so that's also just interesting, because in a way he was teaching us not just to be so kind of going back to what the Brad's idea, and thank you very much, Brad, thanks to you, now we have the recordings, but the ethos of system dynamics, as you mentioned, right, there is not just modeling part, but ethics, thinking outside of a box. In addition to what also Brad mentioned in terms of, and Paulo, in terms of just academic fields, right, it's, even though, he really wanted us to be practical, but at the same time, as some of you know, many academic fields are very elite. He didn't necessarily train us to be elite. So all of us, actually, pretty much everybody on the tape went to and become successful academics in different fields. And we blended in, but also not just blended in, but also we learn from them, right? From being marketing, in my case, it's finance. And so I learned from finance, and I contributed to finance, and was humble enough to understand what I don't know, what I should learn, but not be dogmatic about thinking that my approach or my way is a highway, right? So I think I really appreciate Jay teaching us, and also, of course, system dynamics is a new field, so we had to, in order to be successful academics, we had to reinvent ourselves several times. But by seeing him, but he reinvented himself at least 3 times, that we could do this, and this can be done successfully, that we're willing to take the risk. One thing
what are the 3 times that you're talking about for Jay?
Huh?
What are the 3 things, the 3 revolutions that you're talking about for Jay? I'm aware of 2 of them, but I'm not sure what you're thinking about for the 3rd.
A skydiver? Is that when? No, that isn't.
Well, I mean, I would even go in like going back where he started from, right? I mean, he grew up on a farm, and one of the things he did there, came up with a way to have connections there, right? Remember? Like he was
his
sure
farm.
You're counting the farm as a revolution. That's cool. So Mila, that's such a great systems thinking skill, expanding your time horizon further back in history than I was thinking. So well done.
Exactly. But it's also actually the farm part, many of you maybe not think about this, but for me, I would say and this is, I remember Christine asked us to think about anecdotes, so maybe I can mention it now. For me, that was actually pivotal. The reason I'm saying, like now, when I study, I work with, for example, Bob Merton, right, who's at MIT, and he won a Nobel Prize, right? So we're very famous people, and I always try to understand what drives them, where are they coming from, right? So I like to go back as far as possible. And the same thing with Jay. I remember Jay told us this, and that always stayed with me, is he's like, the reason he took lots of risk in his, and did sort of his revolutions in his life, and also, Brad, I don't know if educational, that's kind of another thing I was thinking about, to education and outreach, that's kind of revolutionary way of thinking. But anyway, so he said, I always had a farm, okay? So that's what do you guys remember, Brad? Paulo, right? You said
Yeah, and what he meant by that was that if he failed at this, he could always go back and be a farmer. He always had it. And
exactly.
actually it's still in his family. I think his children
But
still own it.
but I
Exactly.
think that at least Jim Hines. I mean, there are a couple of interesting stories about Jay about the farm, right? And a particular incident where he was sitting in the desk of his advisor. What's his name now?
Gordon Brown.
But yes,
Gordon Brown, yeah.
yeah. So Gordon Brown. So what really happened was Jay and a colleague a friend were trying to get his attention for a couple of months. And after a number of weeks that they didn't have it, they learned that Brown would be in his office. And so they both went in, and Jay, this is Jim telling us, sat on his desk. Some versions tell that he actually lay down, and then Jay basically said, I'm not getting out until you give us the attention that we need. And so that's what Brown did with them. And when they left, his friend basically said, Jay, you're nuts, right? So they could have, Brown could have expelled us. And he basically said, yeah, we could always go back to the farm.
Mm.
Now,
Yeah.
it's an amazing story, but it talks, it's well aligned with Jay's courage. But, the way Jim tells the story is that all of us have a farm. And which is the case, right? It's our roots, it's where our heart is, it's where we find peace, courage, and sustenance. And many of us take that for granted. So a lot of times we fail to recognize that it's there, right? That we have those roots to go back to. And so the way I see this, and at least the lesson for me, is that it goes beyond the specific farm that is out there, but it's this place of safety that we all have that we should rely on to be courageous, right?
Right. Yeah.
I there's so many wonderful things that you were talking about. Just Mila, you were alluding to the farm.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I got very concretely from Jay was that he said, there are no shortcuts in a farm. If you've done a good job during the cropping, the crop, basically, then that the harvest will be okay. And there might be challenges associated with the season, and the yield may differ and so on, but there aren't any shortcuts. And there was that tangibility that I think completely influenced the way that Jay would work and see the world. I mean, I remember Jay saying something like, yeah, there's some people that leave everything to the last minute. And as a loyal Brazilian, that was my farm. Those were the roots. You basically leave, to finish all of the work at the last minute, and he would say, well, then people, burn the midnight oil. They may basically work for 24 hours and so on. And what really happens is next day, you reap the consequences of that stress, right? And so for him, there was a very vivid and tangible thing about the way things actually work in a farm. You have to do the work. It has to be consistent. It has to have real and practical implications. And that perspective has tremendously changed the way I see the world. And it really helped me change that, that, I don't know, training by, I don't know, my original cultural ways.
Yeah, no, it's also to add to that, obviously culture is important, but also for me in terms of research even. I mean, my specialty is in financial risks, right? So the way I looked at we always have you always, he's like, always have a farm. It's pretty much a perfect hedge, right? So if you guys know what I'm talking about, right? But to hedge the risk, right? So to minimize the risk. So take as much risk as you want, but make sure you know how to hedge it, right? So that actually helped me both in professional way, just actually pretty much that's what I do in all the papers I write, is I look at risks and ways to think about hedging it to minimize the risk. And in personal, as Paulo said, is just thinking you don't want to sit and just do nothing. I mean, the easiest thing obviously is to sit and do nothing, but then you're not productive, right? I mean, none of us will be, kind of on Friday, afternoon and before Christmas, zooming here, right? Unless we're really interested in learning and expanding our horizons. So that really is just amazing, right? The guy, he used to wake up like so early, right? As Paula said, I mean, you cannot just binge watch Netflix the night before and sleep in, right? The farm, you have to milk cow, whatever you need to do, right? They don't care if you decided to take a day off. No, you cannot. So the cultural aspect and professional, it really expanded horizons. And just for me personally, I could definitely talk to so many people around the world and in United States who are professionals or academics in different fields, agriculture, climate change, space weather, so on, and have interesting conversations. And another thing, but it's also, I just wanted to mention, we all take lots of classes in how to talk, how to present, how to discuss, but not really how to listen. So I think with Jage's perspective and sitting there, he's not talking like very quickly and so on, just makes you pauses and makes you think, ponder, take notes and listen. I think that makes you a better colleague and a more effective teacher also.
I had one thought that I wanted to throw out there and get your reactions around it. So that was around world dynamics and actually the reactions that Jay had to fend off from William Nordhaus, whom has recently won the Nobel Prize. Now, it is interesting because, as you probably know, Tom Fiddeman has done a lot of work on climate modeling. John Sturman was his supervisor. A lot of what Tom Fiddeman has done was basically look at the original, I think it was DICE model that from Bill Nordhaus, and really looked at those limitations, right? So there's a lot on behavioral theory that actually looks into it and is remarkable. So when Nordhaus won the Nobel Prize, I had this bittersweet feeling, right? So first, of course, for climate research being recognized and at a global level, and world modeling as a consequence to be taking again sort of center stage, but also with lots of limitations and that I guess were beyond, right? So didn't detract the Nobel Committee from issuing the Nobel Prize to Nordhaus. So I sent a message to both Fiddeman and John, right? So voicing that, and it was interesting, right? Because these are two people that have done so much work for climate change, climate modeling, a lot of real impact, and but are not mainstream academically, right? So when we think about economics, for example, the visibility that economics has. So I would just leave it at that. But when I look at the work that Tom Fitterman has done in his dissertation, and the improvements, as well as the insights for climate policy, they are spot on, right, in terms of what's feasible today.
Okay, thank you. And I would also like to point out we're 12 minutes past the hour, so if you actually have to leave, we understand. But there has been some questions in the chat. One of them was, if you were to ask Jay a question today, what would you ask him? If you could ask him any.
Wow, such a wonderful.
Mm. Yeah.
I might ask Jay what he thinks are the important problems that the world is facing today. And I suspect that his answer would be they haven't changed in 50 years.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I would ask the question just so I could hear him say that.
Right. I mean, it was also interesting. I remember when we worked with roadmaps, which was a project specifically for K to 12, the idea was that it's really impossible, I mean, from his point of view, to change the minds of older people, right? And minds and also in senses, like so entrenched in the culture and systemic parts. So so the idea is like, let's just wait and let them die off and teach the young, right? So I guess the question I would say, did we succeed? Or I mean, what do you see, right? I mean, some of those kids did grow up already in leading organizations. Lots of those kids actually running, Google, Facebook, and so on, right? Before, they're young CEOs. So is anything changed, or maybe the problem is more systemic, such as just the way the resources are allocated, the way where money goes, and the talent and which fields are, more entrenched and which fields are, more innovative. I mean, so that's kind of a question I'll say. To also build on a little bit what Paulo said, it's, yes, there are lots of fields that are really like original or entrenched and so on, but also many fields have became more at the forefront since we had this discussion. For example, something, for example, my husband does, which is drug discovery, which is combination of chemistry, computer science. It wasn't available before, because the computers were too slow. So now we can actually combine it and discover and make drugs and to cure people. The data science, right? Some of the work we're doing on data science, analyzing words, analyzing sentiment, and so on, and combining it with other fields, computer science or finance or business or anything else. That's kind of a combination. That's a new field, pretty much, right? So, so I would say many of us were easy, like because we're not so entrenched in one field versus another. It was easier for us to move from one place to another and work across different disciplines. So if you actually look at many of the system dynamics kind of kids as we are, and look at where we publish, it's not one field. But I guess the question I was going to ask is about, do you think that, the people change, or at least, I mean, he was actually thinking that they should die off and the new people will take the reign and they will have a more systemic approach. Do you think it is? I mean, on some issues like climate change, you can see it, right? From Greta, and others, the younger population is really, really entrenched and wants to change things in climate change. But that's the question I would ask him.
If I may actually, when Jay was already in his mid-90s, I actually had a chance to ask Jay, so as a new or an assistant professor with a number of aspirations, thinking about impact, concerned about issues, different issues. I did ask, so I said, I guess I asked him, so if he would be starting his career, like I was, if he would be in my position, what would he do? And how could he have the biggest impact? And he said a couple of things that I think were very helpful and I mean aligned with some of the other topics that we have discussed. So I think the very last conversation was around I mean of this sort was around 10, 12 years ago. And I told Jay that I was moving to Switzerland and focusing on humanitarian issues. And he basically said, that it's important to have courage. And at times, it goes back to this, if here is the line, and if you want to change it a little bit, that might be something that you can do with some influence. But if you really want to reverse it to the other way, you really have to think about the system in a completely different way. And what he said was, if you think about big established organizations, institutions, and so on, it might be very difficult because they have a lot of inertia. It might be very difficult to do that. And instead, if you're thinking about new organizations and organizations that have more flexibility and you can design them and have a higher influence, that those might be the places where you can have this significant influence to completely shift the vision. That was one thing. The second thing was, so I mean, if we tend, and this was true for my upbringing, so growing up in Brazil, feeling like I needed to prove myself at an international level, and feeling that I did not have the same chances as other people as I was growing up. So there was an element of let me just prove myself that I belong, and also this notion of gaining reputation by association. So so long as I was at MIT, you would automatically get the recognition and reputation. And I found that to be very refreshing coming from Jay. And then it was a wonderful thing for me, meaning that you get to stand on your own mistakes, right? And your own choices. And again, it was a conversation about courage, right? Courage to take ownership for your decisions and reputation are not associated with concrete impact. And of course, there is a huge risk of not amounting to anything. But on the other hand, it is such a wonderful opportunity for learning and for growth. At one point, I was a visiting professor at MIT, and I recognized that at that time, there was a chance of just staying, not a tenure track at that time, but I did very well teaching at Sloan. I could potentially stay. I know that Sloan has a chance, has a need for good system dynamics faculty. And then I never regretted leaving. And in part because it was this aspect, I mean, I miss MIT dearly. I love the place. I love John, Brad, the ethos of being there, the academic honesty, the intellectual honesty, the all that is associated with focus on growth and learning. And at the same time, it was potentially the first time that I was taking, being courageous enough to say, yeah, I'm going to a small university. And at that time, the university was 10 years old, so had no history, no reputation, nothing. And many of my good friends say, are you nuts? Why would you do that? right? You were at MIT. Why not try to stick around? And it was a wonderful opportunity to fail on my own. So, as a true entrepreneur, I think that people would resonate with that. It has been fantastic. Now, I wouldn't call myself a successful academic, but I would call myself as having had the opportunity to fail in different ways, but learn tremendously from it. I mean, it has really made me grow as a person and as a researcher. And I do hope that the future, I continue to do impactful work, perhaps even more than before. So Jay was, fundamental in, at least for me, bringing a little bit of peace and peace of mind and perspective on that choice.
And it's also interesting, like, he was pushing us to be uncomfortable. But I remember, it's a personal anecdote, we had the discussion, one of his kind of events, and he was discussing about a shower in his bath, and specifically what he was saying, what we all know, when we go to a shower, it's like you turn on water and it's like so cold or hot, so it takes like a couple of seconds to equilibrate, but we all have to deal with this uncomfort, and it's fine, whatever. And he's like redesigned it, so he put the shower we had like the opposite, so it starts in a different place, and then it's kind of, when there is a good temperature, he moves it around. So it's interesting, right? It's like, he would not be uncomfortable standing for a couple of seconds between hot, cold, but because, it's a problem that could be solved, right? For him and his, for Susan, but thinking about being uncomfortable on other levels, on a bigger level, that's kind of his fine. So it's just kind of interesting, because I remember that anecdote, I just really talk about something so personal like a shower, but from a point of view as this is a problem, and you solve it, instead of like every day you take a shower and you're like, oh, it's cold. So just a personal anecdote.
Okay. There's
I don't know. Other thoughts? Sorry, Christine.
There are more questions in the chat, but I know we're almost half an hour past the time that we expected, and I want to thank you so much for coming. But I don't want to keep you if you're busy.
So I think, Joost, the model for DEC, I think that was the market growth as influenced by capital investment, right? So, which is a fantastic model, and John used it to, as a basis for People's Express. So it is really about entrepreneurial activity. Yeah. So it's basically the same model. I mean, John has used it a couple of other places, I think. I think that there is a model that he has, I don't know, Rogelio has worked with him and improved. I mean, Mila, Brad, you might know a little bit more about this, but.
Well, I just said something in the chat. So there was actually this is a good little teaching moment for system dynamicists. There's a very standard structure that we use in lots of models of organizations that we call the rookie pro aging chain, right? So a stock of people without experience that flows into a stock of people with experience, and you can disaggregate that into as many levels as you want. And at least to my knowledge, the very first time that structure was used was when David Packer was helping Jay build this model that was, they called it the DEC model. There's a really heavily buried, hard to find paper or chapter in a book somewhere that David Packer wrote about that in the very beginning. It's really old, and like nobody would ever say read this because it's part of the standard canon, because that structure is described elsewhere. But I happen to know David Packer, and he's a great guy also, and one of Jay's earliest students. So I was sort of intrigued by that thing, and that's why I got it there. But so anyway, that's what's interesting about this, Jay did not start doing system dynamics to try to write down all of the ways you would model different things. He just solved problems when they came in front of him. And so he didn't come up with the rookie pro structure because he thought it should be on the list of things people need to model. He solved the problem that he had to model that in real time. That's the same reason he invented, random access core memory. It was needed at the time, and that's the way he did it. And one of the things that's most amazing is that if you look at the models that we today build as system dynamicists, if you write down the list of things that we call standard formulations, it is amazing how many of those were in models that Jay built in the first few years of his doing this, when he was actually building models on his own. The market growth model is worth looking at just because every piece of this in that is a reusable thing that's now called a molecule in Vensim terms, right? It's just really amazing how much of that stuff Jay did in the early days. And we haven't done anything. I mean, we haven't really made it better, right? We don't use dimensioned inputs and table functions anymore, but that's about the only thing that's really changed in 50 years.
But I mean, Jim Hines has done such an amount of work building the molecules, and to really come up with how is it that,
well, a hierarchy, the relationships
the
between them,
hierarchy,
right? Yeah.
yes, but it's
But the point is that he didn't come up with new molecules. What he did was he cataloged basically what Jay had already done.
That's it. And but that was exactly the point, that Jim was basically cataloging the different tacit knowledge that was available in the heads of different system dynamicists, but basically deriving from the D memos and a lot of the work that Jay had done in different papers. So it is truly remarkable in that way. So I guess there was another point, but
one thing I wanted also to mention, just in terms of Jay's, I mean, that's kind of related to molecules, just succinctly describing the problem, not overcomplicating it. It's just the way he speaks, right? So when you listen to him, and that's not just, again, there was a question, Christine, you asked about edited version. I don't think they edited any Jay's, it doesn't matter how old he was or when, if you get him before lunch or after, or the first thing in the morning, he was very clear, right? The way he speaks, it's very clear. And I actually, in my life, academic life or just professional life, I really try to spend as much time as possible with people like that. And to tell you the truth, I can probably list them on one hand, okay? So these are people who are clear how they speak. So that's a big function. The input function to how they speak is how they think, right? So if you think really clearly and speak, sometimes, I can catch myself, I can speak, and like 10 minutes after I speak, I totally the opposite thing of what I started with, right? That's not clear thinking, right? So, but really, if you the way you think, the way you speak, and the way you convey information, I am so honored to have met Jay and a couple of people like this in the life who are really pretty much top people in their fields. But there is a reason why they are top people in the field, because they convey information so clearly that, it could be undergraduate student. When I met Jay, I was undergraduate student. I was, wow, I can understand. It's not just, oh, wow, this was amazing person, famous. I could understand what he was talking about. With professors here who are, on the call, graduate students, it's just amazing how the clear way of people speaking. And I have always tried in my way, specifically when I present or teach, at least have some part of that wisdom, because that's just something amazing, I would say. So if you ever meet anybody, I'm sure I hope you meet some of your mentors or colleagues or somebody who is like that, that's a gift.
So to that point, I think that there are a few things that I wanted to mention, and not to take the least away from Jay, but to think in terms of how can we as individuals progress towards that. I completely agree with what you said, Mila. Jay was tremendously structured in the way he taught. I have seen him over the course of 10 years plus give the talk at the the 18574 or so on, the introduction to system
15874. That's what you wanted to say. Yeah,
15874.
but the
Yes.
numbers have now changed. It's now 871 and 873.
Right.
I think.
So I've
Yeah.
seen change, but 15 is the
There's no
slow
15874 in the books anymore.
Oh no.
But
We're being
anyway,
MIT nerds here. Sorry. Listen, guy, I didn't mean to interrupt, but since I did, I think I'm going to have to leave here. So my goal is to be on Mila's list of the 5 clearest thinkers in the world. I mean, speakers in the world. So it's really clear to me that it's time for me to leave this. I'm really happy to have joined you all. So thank you so much for this opportunity. It was great to see Mila and Paulo and Joost and Rafat again. I see some of you more often than others. Thanks for organizing it, Christine. But I gotta go.
And happy holidays, and say hi to
Happy
Sally.
holidays. Yeah,
happy holidays. Say hi to Sally. And Sean,
I will.
looking forward to seeing you soon and giving you a hug in person.
Hopefully, give a
All the
hug.
best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
What the idea?
before you go, Brad, let me just mention that Brad is super active in the System Dynamics Society, Rafat as well. And I would
Paulo's
invite
the incoming president.
Yay.
but I would actually encourage all of you to take an active role. It's a wonderful group of people. They are all volunteers. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn, but also to contribute to an amazing group. And then, you have people like Brad, Rafat, myself, Birgit, Bob Eberline, and a host of other people that have been mentioned here that are very generous with their time and eager to tackle important problems. So if you are not heavily involved, Thomas is part of our marketing committee. It's heading, and we just had a policy council, and Thomas had a wonderful presentation for us. I hope to see more of you there. Okay, so thanks for staying a bit longer, Brad.
Yes. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Thanks. Happy holidays. Yes.
So I just to conclude the thought, I should leave soon as well. To mention that there are a number of things. So Jay was super structured, and there was a consistency in terms of his message that was remarkable. I must have heard the story about, the story that he talked about in the world dynamics, and the one about urban dynamics, and his decisions at the board of DEC, and many, many other ones for at least 10, 15 times in different settings. And there was a consistency about it, a clarity of purpose that was remarkable. Now, so there was, definitely an amazing attribute of that clarity. I think that we all can improve the way that, so maybe not be Jay, but be like Jay. And I think that, more and more research shows that we can reach that. And there are things that we know help, right? So exercise regularly, sleep. Yeah, it's kind of back to the basics. Sleep. So this is what I tell my kids, right? Meditate, right? So physical health, mental health, eat well, healthy food. We know intermittent fasting also helps. Clarity of mind, clarity of thought, and then honesty, right? So Jay talked about courage, but ultimately honesty, right? So what are you What do you care about? Where are problems? A lot of times, as Mila has mentioned, I have been an entrepreneur in terms of starting projects inside, outside of the university, starting programs, failing. And as an entrepreneur, you don't have the luxury of not being honest, because as long as you are dishonest or you don't confront the issues, they don't get resolved. The company eventually fails. But it's the same for us as individuals. And going back to Jay's wonderful opportunity to be raised as a farmer, if you take shortcuts, you basically don't have the crop at the end of the season, right? You have to do the work. You have to take it diligently. And it's also about accumulations, right? There's no secret. You basically put in the hours. You are honest about making good progress. You do it diligently, every day for a long, long time. So there's a lot of research. Take one, for example, something called deliberate practice. And it's research by a psychologist called Anders Ericsson that focuses on virtuosos in different areas. So geniuses, genius athletes, genius musicians, genius academics, and so on. They all focus on incremental improvement over and over and over. They focus on what's wrong. They are honest about it. They do drills and they do it consistently. So I'd like to leave you with that hopeful thought to have courage. I mean, to mirror Jay's insights. Be concrete, not think about shortcuts. Let's be honest. Do the basics, and in some ways, it's a note to self, right? Because I am far from doing that in a consistent basis, but I certainly can learn from it. I'll stop here, but I wanted to share that with you.
Okay, thank you. Any last thoughts, anyone?
That was a good last thought.
Okay.
We should ponder on it. I'm going to start meditating on it.
Thank you.
Very good.
That's it, Mila. We will meditate in tandem,
Yes. Yeah.
thousands of miles away apart.
Yes. And thanks to, Jim, I'm sorry, thanks to Christine and Brad and, Paulo for doing so much for the society, and thanks to Christine for organizing this. It's really, again, it's a great seminar, but it also what you did is great. You interconnected, right? You kind of brought the system back for some of it and interconnected us together, and it's important. And if you have any of you guys on the call, if you have any questions and want to follow up with us, you shared our links, so definitely would like to continue these conversations. And Paula, now you're president. If you need any help with the society, let me know.
Help. Yes, everyone.
Exactly. That's yeah.
So we definitely need people like Rafat, Brad, Thomas. Come and join. Christine,
yeah.
Joost. I see Tak, Kelechi. I think that you have been doing some work with Rebecca. At least I have heard about that. Tipper. I hope I'm saying that right. So yes, I am recruiting.
Definitely.
Perfect. We are only as good as the strength of our team. So no, seriously, thank you so much for the opportunity, Christine, everyone.
Thanks, Christine.
Wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
Take good care and happy holidays.
Happy
You
holidays.
too.
And safe year. Okay, great. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.